What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Octies Draft Talks channel. Today we have my 2023 NFL Mock Draft 5.0. Before we get started, I want to wish everybody a happy Easter for those who celebrate, and if not, happy Sunday. Happy Mock Draft Day, because you're getting another mock draft here. It's been a little while since the last one. I think I did it before free agency started, so we've obviously seen what's going through with the combine and free agency. Team needs look a lot different now, and we have a better idea of what certain teams are going to be looking to do in this year's draft. So this mock draft will be 3 rounds with trades, and keep in mind I'm trying to predict what these teams do, and I don't necessarily agree with all of these selections, but they should happen. But these are my best guesses right now on what will happen. The draft is pretty close, only 2.5 weeks away. It's really sneaking up on us. There's going to be plenty more draft content here up until the draft with more mock drafts. I'm eventually going to reveal my player rankings a few days prior to the draft, and you should expect plenty more podcast episodes as well. So we've got a lot of fun stuff coming on this channel within the next month leading up to the NFL draft. But without further ado, let's get it started. The Carolina Panthers, of course, now had the number 1 pick, and they select C.J. Stroud, the quarterback out of Ohio State. I would personally pick Bryce Young here, but C.J. Stroud is certainly not a bad option either. I think he's Carolina's guy when it's all said and done. There have been some rumors and some chatter over the last week that the number 1 pick is going to be Bryce Young. After all, a lot of people are really buying into it. I, for one, don't believe that in the slightest, and here's why. I think what Carolina's trying to do is set up smoke. I think it's pretty obvious that Bryce Young is Houston's guy. He's the player who the Texans really want. So I think what Carolina is trying to do is to try to bait the Texans into moving up to the number 1 pick to try to get Bryce Young. Carolina would then get some more additional assets. They would move down to 2, and they would still get their guy, C.J. Stroud. Sure, there's a chance it's true, and if Carolina really wants Bryce Young, they can ultimately pick him. But I think right now my guess is that it is smoke. Carolina's trying to get Houston to budge up to number 1, and if the Texans are smart, for now, they will be patient and not buy it. So the Texans get to stay at 2. They get their guy, Bryce Young. This is a slam dunk pick for the Texans, no question about it. If the Panthers do pick Bryce Young at 1, which again, I don't buy Carolina wants him, but hypothetically, if they did, that creates the question of what Houston does at 2. Ultimately, I think the pick would probably be C.J. Stroud. They could always look for one of the other quarterbacks with more upside. Or maybe if they don't like any of the other quarterbacks, they could always go on the defensive side of the ball with most likely Will Anderson, if not possibly Tyree Wilson. With the 3rd pick, the Arizona Cardinals select Will Anderson, the pass rusher out of Alabama. If the Cardinals keep this pick, I have a hard time thinking it won't be Anderson. Obviously, the Cardinals could move back from a team looking to jump the Colts and get their quarterback. However, in this mock draft, I have Arizona keeping their selection. Now, there is a shot that Tyree Wilson is the top defensive player off the board. I think depending on the team, some organizations are going to prefer Tyree Wilson as opposed to Will Anderson. I think Seattle, who values versatility on the defensive line, would prefer a guy like Tyree Wilson. I think Arizona, on the other hand, would rather Will Anderson. There are some people who are starting to buy into the notion that Tyree Wilson could be the first defensive player off the board. I think I said somewhere on this channel like 2 months ago that was a possibility. So I'll give myself a pat on the back for recognizing that is a realistic thing that could happen before anybody else did. With the 4th pick, I had the Colts selecting Will Levis, quarterback out of Kentucky. This surely could be Anthony Richardson, but I think Will Levis could be a guy who the Colts really like. I'm not a Will Levis guy, for reference. However, I think he has become probably the most disrespected player in the entire draft cycle. I think everybody's trying too hard to find the next Zach Wilson, and surely you want to figure out if a quarterback is a bust or not. But I feel like there's just this negative connotation around Will Levis, and while he was not great this past season at Kentucky, I really don't feel like it's deserved. He was very solid in 2021, and he has a lot of things you like. He's got a strong arm, he dealt with a bad hand, and I think because of that, playing with a poor line and poor skill position players, he might be a little bit more prepared for a faster type of game in the NFL. So I think that Will Levis has been very disrespected, and he could surprise some people. And at this point, I'm kind of hoping he does. I want to see him succeed just so everybody who is calling him a bust already, or maybe not a bust, but everybody who lazily thinks he's a bad prospect, I hope they all look stupid. The Seahawks at 5 pick Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. This could be Jalen Carter, but I think Seattle's really going to like the size and length from Tyree Wilson, who's a very versatile player. I think he'd be a nice fit on their defense. Detroit at 6. I think this pick right here might be the most important one of the entire draft, and it's really going to decide how really the rest of the draft goes. And I'm not saying that biasedly as a Lions fan. I genuinely think this selection is not only a turning point for the draft, but also a turning point for the Lions organization, who is currently on the come up. They won 9 games last year. The roster looks significantly better with some big-time additions in free agency. And I think this pick very well could be a quarterback. I think Anthony Richardson is absolutely in play here. And if I was picking, I would choose Anthony Richardson here. However, I would not be upset in the slightest if the Lions just go all in on defense. If the Lions do pick a defensive player here, in this case it's Jalen Carter, that will tell me that Detroit is fully in on building around Jared Goff, which I'm totally fine with. I think this is the Lions' best opportunity to upgrade at the position because most likely Detroit will not be picking this high again. And if the Lions are picking in the top 10 within the next few years, then that means something went horribly wrong. So I think if Detroit wants to get their quarterback, this is the year to do it. 2021 was not the year. It was the first year of the new regime. Surely they could have gotten a guy like Justin Fields, but I think Detroit was so focused on building the culture and building through the trenches. Last year, there were no great quarterbacks in the draft, and it would never have made sense for us to pick one in the first round. I think this is the time to do it, and if the Lions like Anthony Richardson, he very well could be the pick here. However, I'm leaning on Detroit not picking a quarterback right now. Again, if it was me, I would, and I certainly think there's a chance that Anthony Richardson is the pick here. But for this mock draft, I have it being Jalen Carter, who would be a phenomenal fit within that defense. And yes, there are questions about Jalen Carter's character. A lot of people don't think he'd be a fit within the Lions culture, but the way I view it is Detroit can fix him. And I think that's the idea that Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes are going to look at with Jalen Carter. And I think this, while there is some risk, the reward is sky high. So with the 7th pick, this is where Anthony Richardson goes off the board, but not to the Raiders. Instead, the Tennessee Titans are moving up. So we've got our first draft day trade. The official deal is that the Titans will get picks 7, 70, and 144. The Raiders, meanwhile, will get picks 11, 41, and a future third. So the Titans aren't giving up anything extreme. They're losing their 2 this year, but they are adding a third. They also have to give up a future third as well, but they're adding a pretty early day 3 pick, and they don't have to trade any future 1s or anything. So I had them going up and getting Anthony Richardson. I know they just drafted Malik Willis last year, but I could see the new GM wanting his own guy. Malik Willis reportedly has fallen out of favor within the Titans organization, and I don't think drafting Malik Willis last year is going to stop them from looking at another quarterback. It's not like Malik Willis was a first rounder. I get he had all the first round buzz around him, but the fact of the matter is he was a 3rd round pick, and Tennessee took a shot on the dark on him, and while it's early, it's looking like that it's not going to work out. So I think Tennessee may realize that, and again, Malik Willis is not going to stop you from getting your guy. Now, some people are going to say that Anthony Richardson is a lot like Malik Willis, and I think that is a horrible take. That means you know nothing about Anthony Richardson. While he has some big physical tools, as did Malik Willis, I think Anthony Richardson has more long-term upside than Malik Willis. And while there were some inconsistencies with Richardson this year, he did really improve throughout the season, and obviously he's dynamic as a runner. Obviously he's got a great arm, and I think it's not that he's inaccurate, he's just inconsistent. And I think that's something that can certainly be coached up. And I think for Tennessee to not have to give up an extreme amount of draft capital, this would be a win for them. With the 8th pick, the Atlanta Falcons select Christian Gonzalez, cornerback out of Oregon. The Falcons could use some more help in the secondary. They did sign Jesse Bates at safety to a big contract. Now you're pairing up a big-time cornerback prospect along with A.J. Terrell and Christian Gonzalez, who for me is probably my number 1 corner in this draft, although there are a few guys not too far behind him. One of those guys not too far behind Gonzalez is Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois. I have him going here with the 9th pick, but not to the Chicago Bears. We have another trade, and it's the ultra-rare interdivision trade. The Lions are moving up to the 9th pick to select Devin Witherspoon. Detroit will be receiving picks 9 and 133. The Bears will get 18, 48 in the second round, along with Minnesota's third rounder next year, part of the TJ Hawkinson trade, and a 6th rounder next year from Detroit. So the Lions are giving up quite a bit here. 2 day 2 selections to move up to the 9th pick, and they're adding 2 of the best defensive prospects in this draft class with Jalen Carter and Devin Witherspoon. Detroit has shown a willingness to be aggressive and go up and get their guy, just like they did with Jamison Williams last year, and that was also a interdivision trade with Minnesota. So, yeah, it is a little bit of a gamble trading in division, but for this Detroit defense to add Devin Witherspoon and Jalen Carter while still keeping one of their second-round picks, along with most of their picks next year, I think this would be a massive win for Detroit. With the 10th pick, the Philadelphia Eagles, oh boy, this is a hot take right here. I have them selecting Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas, and I understand Howie Roseman does not use premium draft picks on running backs. Howie Roseman's a guy who really focuses on positional value, going with offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and cornerbacks early in drafts, and that's probably what the Eagles are ultimately going to do. However, I think there's a real argument for Bijan to be their selection. The Eagles roster is head to toe really, really good, and I think they can afford a luxury pick. Although, is it really a luxury? Bijan Robinson has a chance to be the best running back really in the league, if not one of, as soon as he signs the contract. The Eagles are getting an elite player, likely for 5 years at the position, with the 4-year rookie scale contract along with the 5th-year option. So is it worth it to only have this player realistically in a 5-year window, but he's awesome during those 5 years? I think if you're in a scenario like the Eagles, the answer is easily yes. Philadelphia has hit on a lot of late-round draft picks recently, so I trust them to be able to still fill out their roster with future players later in the draft. They have another first-rounder as well. Yes, the Eagles signed Rashad Penny this offseason, and when he is healthy, he's really good, but he's barely ever healthy, and Bijan Robinson would instantly make this offense probably one of, if not the scariest in all of football. So if the Eagles are really serious about contending over these next few years, especially while Jalen Hurts is still on his rookie contract, which is only for 1 more year, then I think picking a guy like Bijan Robinson, who makes your team instantly better, would be a good move. People are going to argue it's not a good long-term decision, but if Bijan Robinson is healthy over the next 5 years, then I don't really see a problem with it. With the 11th pick, the Las Vegas Raiders select Kalijah Kancey, the defensive lineman out of Pitt. He's a little bit undersized, but he's got big-time pass rushing upside. The Raiders moved back. They added a 2 from the Titans. They swapped third-round picks. And ultimately, the Raiders got pretty good value. I think this is a little bit early for Kancey, but I couldn't really find a better pick for them at this stage in the draft. At pick 12, the Texans select Nolan Smith, the edge rusher out of Georgia. I think this is a guy DeMeco Ryans is really going to like on and off the field. Nolan Smith can be a big-time culture guy for the Texans. He's a great leader, and I think DeMeco Ryans is really going to enjoy using Nolan Smith in a variety of different ways on his defense. Paris Johnson is the first offensive lineman off the board going to the Jets. I do not have the 13th pick being used in an Aaron Rodgers deal. I think the Jets ultimately hold on to it, and they get a very talented tackle prospect with Johnson, who probably will be able to start right away at left tackle. Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State goes to New England. He just feels like a Patriots type of corner. Good size, good length, solid athleticism. Had a great season at Penn State and tested pretty well at the Combine. I think Bill Belichick is really going to like him. The Patriots have been heavily linked to Zay Flowers. I could see that being an option for them, but I think they're really going to like Joey Porter. The Packers at 15 select Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver out of Ohio State. This pick was painful for me to put in. I think JSN is the best receiver in this draft class by a wide margin. I do not want him going to Green Bay. I am aware that Brian Gutekunst does not use valuable picks on wide receivers, and while this would be out of the ordinary for his drafting resume over the past few years, I could see the Packers talking themselves into it. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a phenomenal player. He's going to be great right off the bat. He would arguably be Green Bay's best receiver on day one, and that says something coming from me because I'm a big Christian Watson guy. I think he's awesome. But you need to get weapons for Jordan Love, and I think JSN would be an awesome fit in that offense. I really hope it doesn't happen, but I think there is a shot it certainly could. At pick 16, Washington selects Peter Skoronski, the offensive lineman out of Northwestern. He played tackle in college. There is a question with his short arm length. Is he going to be able to hold up at tackle in the long term, or will he have to slide over to guard? Washington's getting great value with this pick, as Skoronski is projected to go a little bit higher than this, but he ultimately slides a little bit, and the Commanders take advantage of the value. With the 17th pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa. While defensive line isn't the biggest need on paper for the Steelers, I think Lucas Van Ness can be a really good developmental prospect for them. The Steelers have a high track record of developing guys like him, and I think ultimately he could be a good long-term fit on the defense. Yes, I understand they need tackle and corner really badly, but they do have 2 second-round picks, including the top pick in the second round, and I think they will really like Van Ness. The Bears at pick 18, they traded back from 1, then they traded back for 9. They get Deonte Banks out of Maryland. Ultimately, I think this second trade back is a win for the Bears. You had a second-round pick, you had a third-rounder next year, and you're drafting Deonte Banks, who really is not that much worse of a prospect than Devin Witherspoon. Banks has risen up draft boards, and for good reason. He's a phenomenal player, tested very well at the Combine, and I think the Bears have made out really well. Yes, they don't end up with a blue-chip talent, but Deonte Banks is really, really good. The Buccaneers select DeJuan Jones out of Ohio State at pick 19. He is a large human. People should not be able to move the way he does. Mekhi Becton just a few years ago was the 11th overall pick, and I think Jones is a slightly worse prospect than Becton. But I'm surprised Jones isn't getting more first-round love. I know a lot of people do have him in the first round, but I'm a little bit surprised it's not consensus. I think he will end up being a first-round pick. The Bucs could use another tackle, so I think he'd be a solid selection. At pick 20, we have another trade. The Minnesota Vikings are moving up 3 spots with the Seattle Seahawks. The Vikings will receive picks 20, 151, and 198, while Seattle gets 23 and 87 in the third round. Minnesota does not have a ton of day 3 picks, so they're going to add some more. They do lose their third, and they already traded away their second. So that means this will be Minnesota's only pick of the day, bearing another trade-up. They're going to select Tyreek Stevenson out of Miami, the cornerback, another guy who I'm surprised is not a consensus first-round pick at this point. He's going to be really, really good right off the bat. The floor is very high, and Minnesota needs guys who can play at the cornerback position because their secondary was not good last year. I think one of the Chargers at 21 or the Ravens at 22 would pick Tyreek Stevenson. So Minnesota's going to have to move up to get their guy, and I think it is worth it for them. At pick 21, I've got another trade. The New England Patriots are moving up all the way from the middle of the second round to go up and select Zay Flowers out of Boston College. This is very anti-Bill Belichick to move up 25 spots from 46 to 21. The Patriots are also going to receive pick 125 and a future 6, while the Chargers get 46, 76, a second-round pick next year, and a fifth-round pick next year. Tyreek Stevenson probably would have been the pick for the Chargers, so they have to scramble a little bit. They end up moving back. They get 3 day 2 picks, including one next year, for 21. Again, it's very uncharacteristic for New England to move up and uncharacteristic for them to use an early pick on a receiver, but I think they're really, really going to like Zay Flowers. I mean, he's from Boston College, which is pretty much in their backyard. They've been heavily linked to him since the Shrine Bowl, and I think he could be a big addition within their offense. So while New England loses some day 2 selections, Joey Porter and Zay Flowers is a pretty good first-round tandem for New England. At pick 22, we have another trade. A big-time domino effect with Tyreek Stevenson going at 20 because he also would have been a very good option for the Ravens. Instead, the Buffalo Bills will move up. The Ravens will be receiving picks 27 and 59. The Bills will get 22 and 86. So a pretty straightforward trade. The Ravens move back 5 spots. They turn their third-round pick into a second-round pick. The player the Bills are moving up for is Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. The Bills are another team who have always shown a willingness to move up and be aggressive. If there's a player they want, they're going to go and get him, just like they did with Kaiir Elam last year, only moving up a couple spots, but that shows. If the Bills have a guy they really like, they're going to go up and make their move. I think Darnell Wright could be a really good fit on their offense. They could use some help along the offensive line. They really struggled in the trenches, both the offensive and defensive line, in their divisional round loss to the Bengals. Darnell Wright can play both tackle and guard. I think he'd be a good fit on this offense, and this pick, I feel like, is something that really could happen. Maisie Smith out of Michigan goes to the Seahawks. They moved down 3 spots. They had a 3rd-round pick. And now they add Maisie Smith, who's really gotten some buzz to be a potential 1st-round pick, and I'm buying into it. He was number 1 on Feldman's Freaks list. He is a phenomenal athlete. The production's been inconsistent, but I think there's a lot of upside, and Seattle's really improving their defensive line with Smith and Tyree Wilson. Will McDonald out of Iowa State to the Jaguars at 24. McDonald's a question mark because he wasn't really used right at Iowa State. He's also a little bit older. I believe he's going to turn 24 at some point during his rookie season. But the Jaguars are going to hope that he will provide what they originally hoped that K'Lavon Chaisson, who has turned into kind of a bust at this point, would have been able to do. At pick 25, I had the Giants selecting Brian Branch, the defensive back out of Alabama. The Giants could use some more guys in the secondary, whether that's at safety along with Xavier McKinney or in the slot at corner. Luckily, Brian Branch can do both of those things, so I think he'd be a nice addition to their defense. Dallas at 26 gets Dalton Kincaid, the tight end out of Utah. They lost Dalton Schultz, and tight end's always a position in recent years with Schultz and going back to Jason Witten that Dallas has really cared about. And I think Kincaid would be a good fit along their offense. He is a phenomenal receiver, very good with the ball in his hands. He does have some medical question marks with a back injury that caused him to not participate in the combine, but hopefully that's not going to be a lingering injury and he'll be good to go. The Ravens moved back 5 spots. They select Osiris Torrance, the guard out of Florida. Ravens fans are probably thinking, why is this not a wide receiver? There are a few good options on the board. Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, all guys who I could see being the pick here. But all 3 of those guys have some noticeable flaws in their game. And I think Torrance would be a good fit on their offensive line. And in terms of value, I think he is a better pick than any of those guys. Keep in mind, the Ravens are now picking in the 2nd round thanks to the trade back. So they'll have a good opportunity to potentially get a receiver there or move up if they want to. Broderick Jones, a tackle out of Georgia, goes to the Bengals. It seems like Jonah Williams' time in Cincinnati is going to be coming to an end. The Lyle Collins experiment did not work. They signed Orlando Brown, but they need somebody else. Broderick Jones could be a developmental guy who ultimately will eventually become a starter. Brian Brzee to the New Orleans Saints at pick 29. He's a little bit raw. I think there's a long ways to go in his development, and I think he's a little bit overhyped as a draft prospect, but I do think the Saints, who have developed interior defensive linemen very well over the past few years, are going to hope to take on the project of Brian Brzee and turn him into a big-time player. At pick 30, the Los Angeles Rams are moving up, so the Rams will be giving up picks 36, 167, 177, 189, and 223 to the Eagles for picks 30 and 248. So the Eagles are acquiring 5 picks and only trading away 2. Philadelphia does not pick on day 3 until 219. They need a lot of day 3 draft picks, and the Rams are giving them 4. On the flip side, none of the picks the Rams are giving up are that valuable. The highest pick, other than 36, that the Rams are giving away is 167. The Rams have a number of day 3 picks themselves, and they don't really need all of these picks. So they can send some of them away, move up, and get B.J. Ojulari, who I think is good value here at pick 30. He could be a nice addition to their pass rush as the Rams use a first-round pick for the first time in 7 years. Anton Harrison, the offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, is the final pick of the first round to the Kansas City Chiefs. They lost Orlando Brown. They did sign Jawan Taylor, though, but they could use another tackle long term. And I think Anton Harrison's a guy who could be a good fit in their offense. Now into the 2nd round, we're going to start to move a little bit quicker. Matthew Bergeron, offensive tackle out of Syracuse to the Steelers. I think this is better value than people realize. Bergeron's a really, really good player, and he could be a nice fit for the Steelers, who obviously have a big needed offensive tackle. Joe Tippmann, center out of Wisconsin, to the Texans. Tippmann's a talented player who's a good athlete. I would probably pick John Michael Schmitz as the first center off the board, but I could see teams kind of overlooking Schmitz, kind of like they did with Creed Humphrey a couple years ago and eventually regretting it. That's no slight to Tippmann. I don't think he's a bad pick here in a vacuum, but given the choice, I'd probably pick Schmitz. Emmanuel Forbes, cornerback out of Mississippi State to the Cardinals. He's one of the most polarizing players in this draft class because the ball skills are certainly there, very solid in coverage, but he is skinny. He's sub 170, I believe, so you're going to have to develop him, and while he's got a very slim frame, I mean, the talent is there, and if Arizona can groom him into a good player, then this could be a phenomenal selection here for the Cardinals early in the second round. At pick 35, we've got a trade. The Chargers, who originally moved back, are going to be trading up here. They'll be sending away 46, 85, and 239, and in exchange, they'll be receiving picks 35 and 176 from the Indianapolis Colts. So basically, the Chargers move back 14 spots. They add 2 day 2 picks, essentially, including a second-round pick next year from New England. And the player the Chargers are moving up for is Gibbs, running back out of Alabama. So this is an interesting pick because they already have Austin Eckler on the team. It doesn't seem like Eckler wants to stick around. He wants a new contract. I don't think the Chargers are going to be willing to give it to him. So instead, they're going to be replacing him with Gibbs. Receiving out of the running back position is very important for the Chargers offense. Austin Eckler is one of the best receiving backs in the league. So I think getting a back who can catch the football and make plays as a receiver is going to be very important for the Chargers, and that's exactly what Gibbs brings to the table. The Philadelphia Eagles at 36 select Myles Murphy out of Clemson. Murphy had a down 2022. I think he could go later than people expect. He could be a first-round pick, but ultimately I have him sliding here into the second round. This feels like an Eagles pick. They love building through the trenches. Howie Roseman did not pick a single lineman on day one. He's probably hurt by that, so he's going to pick one here early in day 2 with Murphy, who's a developmental prospect who could become really good. Steve Avila, guard out of TCU to the Seahawks, really good, particularly in pass protection. The Seahawks could use another interior offensive lineman. Avila can play guard and center. They did just sign Evan Brown from Detroit to play center. Brown's not a bad player at all, so Avila most likely would play guard for them. DJ Turner out of Michigan to the Raiders. Al Davis is jumping for joy right now in his grave. The Raiders drafted the fastest player in the draft, at least the fastest player in terms of 40 times at the Combine. DJ Turner's a good prospect, though, not just with the 40 time, and it's no secret the Raiders need help on the defensive side of the ball. Their defense last year was not good. Adetomiwa Adebawore, the defensive lineman out of Northwestern to the Panthers. Carolina needs some help on that defensive line bad. Adebawore is a versatile player who I absolutely could see going in the first round. I've been mocking him in the first round before, and over the last week, I've seen some more first round buzz for him. So again, I'll give myself a pat on the back. I was one of the first people to mock him highly, and it seems like I'm ultimately going to be correct about that. In this mock draft, he does fall a little bit. There weren't any obvious fits for him in the first round, but Carolina will gladly scoop him up here early in the second. We've only had 2 receivers taken so far, but now we're going to start to see a run on pass catchers in general. 5 of the 8 players who are about to go are either receivers or tight ends, and that includes Quentin Johnston out of TCU, going to the Saints at pick 40. This is a lot lower than you're going to see Johnston in most mock drafts, and while there's a lot of upside with him, he's big, he's athletic, there are some question marks with his game. Can he consistently separate? Can he consistently catch the football? The hands are certainly a question for him. Wide receiver is not a pressing need for the New Orleans. They were able to bring back Michael Thomas. Chris Olave is awesome. Rashid Shaheed, he's a fun player, but I don't think guys like Michael Thomas and Rashid Shaheed are going to stop you from picking a guy like Quentin Johnston here at pick 40. And I think he could go a lot later than people expect. I could see somebody falling in love with him and taking a shot on him in the 20s. I don't think he goes any earlier than that, though. Michael Mayer, tight end out of Notre Dame, to the Las Vegas Raiders. They just got this pick from Tennessee in the Anthony Richardson trade-up. The Raiders traded away Darren Waller, and they lost Foster Moreau, who's a good player. And they could use a new tight end, and there's a few good options for them. I'm ultimately going to give them Michael Mayer, who's a very safe prospect and should turn into a good pro. Dion Henley, linebacker of Washington State to the Jets. They got this pick in the Elijah Moore trade. I think he'd be a nice fit on the defense. Kind of an underrated prospect who could be the first linebacker off the board. Here at 43, this pick originally belonged to the Jets, but it does no more. If you can put the pieces together, we've got a trade. Aaron Rodgers is going to the Jets along with picks 170 and 235. The Packers will receive picks 43 and 112 this year. They will also receive a second rounder next year that can be conditionally moved up to a first round pick depending on how Aaron Rodgers and the Jets performed this year. So the deal is done. The Packers are on the clock, and they get Darnell Washington out of Georgia. So the Packers are drafting 2 offensive skill position players with their first 2 picks. What's going on here? Is the sky falling? Darnell Washington feels like a Packer pick. Obviously coming from Georgia. We know they love drafting Georgia players. Their last 3 first-round picks, not including this year with Smith-Njigba, all come from Georgia. So it's not a surprise. The pipeline is absolutely there. Darnell Washington's a big-time athlete. He's a phenomenal blocker, and I do think he will improve as a receiver very quickly in the NFL. Jordan Addison out of USC is finally off the board of the Falcons. There are some concerns with his size. He didn't test well for somebody being 6 foot sub 180, but the fact of the matter is he's a smooth receiver. Line him up in the slot, line him up in the outside. He's a good player. And the Falcons could use another receiver. They already have 2 big targets with Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Now you're adding a smaller, shiftier guy with Jordan Addison. The Packers are right back on the clock. They're picking another Georgia player. Who could have guessed? Kelee Ringo is the pick here. Ringo's a little bit raw, but I think the Packers are going to be able to use him in a variety of different ways. You could make him a safety in the long term. You could also try to develop him a corner. He obviously has size and athleticism that teams drool over. He's got a long ways to go in his development, but the upside with Ringo is certainly there. Josh Downs out of North Carolina to the Colts at pick 46. Downs is a really good player, probably going to be a primary slot option. The Colts did just sign Isaiah McKenzie, but Isaiah McKenzie's not stopping you from adding Josh Downs, who pairs up with big receivers like Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman. Cam Smith out of South Carolina to the Washington Commanders. I would pick him earlier than this. I think he's a good player. You can put him on the outside. You can put him in the slot. Very talented kid. He was a little bit worse in 2022 than he was in 21, but he's still a good player. And again, Washington's really capitalizing on value, just as they did in the first round with Peter Skoronski. At pick 48, the Bears select Felix Anduke-Uzomah, the edge rusher out of Kansas State. They acquired this pick from Detroit earlier today with the Devin Witherspoon trade-up. The Bears' front 7 last year was, to put it nicely, really bad. So they could use some more guys in there, and Anduke-Uzomah is a solid value pick. Clark Phillips, cornerback out of Utah, to the Steelers. He's a little bit tiny, but he's got big-time production, big-time ball skills, and I think he could go a little bit earlier than people expect. Hendon Hooker, quarterback out of Tennessee to the Buccaneers. The dialogue with Hooker has been very interesting recently. I'm not a big Hendon Hooker guy. He's 25 years old. He's coming off an ACL tear. He played in a non-pro styled offense at Tennessee, so it's not even like he's super NFL ready. But apparently some teams really like him. He seems like a smart kid. He could be a guy who eventually develops in the long term, but it's not like he's got elite physical traits. And again, he's 25 years old. I don't think I'd use a second-round pick on him, but I think somebody will. There have been some first-round rumblings with him. Mike Tannenbaum mocked him 5th to Seattle, which is laughable. I don't think that's going to happen. But the Buccaneers likely don't have their long-term quarterback on the roster. They did sign Baker Mayfield, who... I mean, it's Baker Mayfield, but maybe Hendon Hooker can develop and be their guy. Who knows? Jack Campbell, linebacker out of Iowa, to the Dolphins at 51. He's going to be good right off the bat. He's going to be a starter for a decade in this league. I think he should go earlier than this pick. This would be a great first selection for Miami. Julius Brents, cornerback out of Kansas State, to the Seahawks. He's big. He's got great length. That's what Seattle looks for, the cornerback position. So Julius Brents just has Seattle written all over him. John Michael Schmitz to the Bears, the center out of Minnesota. I kind of hinted at it earlier. I think teams could overlook him because he's a little bit older. He doesn't have elite athleticism, but he's going to be really good. Maybe not as good as Creed Humphrey, but he should not fall here late into the second round. Jartavis Martin out of Illinois to the Chargers. He's a versatile defensive back who can use in a variety of different ways. The Chargers could use a really good slot corner. Nasir Adderley at safety, retired. So Martin can be a guy who they use in a variety of different ways. And then Sam Laporta, tight end out of Iowa, to the Lions. I think Detroit really likes this player. Laporta's stock has risen over these past few weeks, and I think he'd be a nice addition to the offense. I think the Lions do like the tight ends they have on the roster, but the fact of the matter is, if they can upgrade, I think they will, and Laporta could be a really good pick for them. At 56, we've got another trade. The Cardinals are moving up with Jacksonville. Arizona will get picks 56 and 127. The Jaguars, meanwhile, will get 66, 105, and 180. The player the Cardinals are trading up for is running back Israel Abanikanda out of Pitt. I don't think I've ever seen Abanikanda in a second round of the mock draft before, so you're probably thinking, why are the Cardinals trading up for him? The reason is that this kid is good. He's a ball player. The Cardinals could use a long-term running back. James Conner probably is not that. And I think Abanikanda has become one of the more underrated players in this draft. I think people are starting to really recognize how good this kid is, and I think he could go a lot earlier than people expect. Jamie Robinson, safety out of Florida State to the Giants. New York is doubling down in the secondary. I understand why Giants fans might be skeptical. Why are we using our first 2 picks on safeties? We already have Xavier McKinney. It's not like we need to. Well, Robinson is also versatile. You're adding 2 guys in the secondary who can do a lot of different things for you. And I think the Giants are going to have fun and creative ways trying to use both Branch and Robinson along with the guys they already have as they try to turn that secondary into a real strength. Drew Sanders, linebacker out of Arkansas to the Cowboys. Sanders was originally an edge rusher, committed to Alabama, transfers to Arkansas, and is sort of turned into an off-ball linebacker. He really did well as a pass rusher in design blitzes. He's still raw in terms of his ability in the run game and in coverage, but I think Dallas is intrigued by the idea of adding another player like Micah Parsons. I don't want to compare him to Micah Parsons because he probably will not be Micah Parsons, but they developed Parsons into a big-time pass rusher, and they could see a few similarities with Sanders. Baltimore Ravens at 59 select Jonathan Mingo, wide receiver out of Ole Miss. Another guy who is really starting to get some day 2 buzz, and I am buying it. There are not many big receivers in this class. Most of the really good receivers are smaller slot first guys. Mingo's tall, he's big, he's good after the catch, and I think he'd be a good value pick for the Ravens here towards the back end of the second round. Tyjae Spears, running back out of Tulane to the Bengals. Joe Mixon's status is in question. Is he going to be back on the team next year? I don't know. Even if he is, he's getting older, and they lost Samaje P. Ryan, so they could just use another running back anyway. Tyjae Spears is a guy whose stock is really going up. You can use him as a weapon out of the backfield as a receiver, and he's a great runner as well. Tank Dell, wide receiver out of Houston to the Bears. They have Darnell Mooney playing in the slot, but Tank Dell isn't your ordinary slot receiver. He can be more the gadget guy who also lines out at receiver and can be a really good player. Find ways to get this kid the football, and he will make plays for you. Sidney Brown, safety out of Illinois to the Eagles. Brown needs some technical refinement. He's not a great tackler, needs to improve in run support. But the coverage ability is certainly there, and they could use some more players in the back end of the secondary with Marcus Epps and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, both gone. Tuli Tuipulotu, really good value here for the Chiefs at 63. He certainly could go higher than this, but this is just how the board played out. And Kansas City will capitalize, adding another talented prospect to the defensive line. Blake Freeland, offensive tackle of BYU to the Bears. He's a little bit of a projection, but he's a great athlete, and Chicago's going to take a shot on upside here. Cedric Tillman, wide receiver out of Tennessee to the Texans. A lot of people are starting to think that Cedric Tillman is the better of the 2 Tennessee wide receiver prospects, and I'm kind of buying into it. You may notice Jalen Hyatt has not been picked yet. Tillman was not great last year. His season was riddled by injury, but in 2021 he was very, very good. 6'3", big kid, big jump ball radius, good ball skills, and I think he's an all-around talented receiver who would be a nice addition to the Houston offense. Luke Musgrave, tight end out of Oregon State to the Jaguars. I've had Luke Musgrave mocked in the first round before. I think that was a little bit rich. He very well could go in the second round, but again, this is how the board played out. The Jags already have Evan Engram, who's a pretty similar player to Musgrave, but Evan Engram's on the franchise tag. He's probably not going to be around long term. Musgrave is a dynamic receiver who is more of a receiving option rather than a blocker. He only played 2 games last year at Oregon State, but I think he could be a good long-term replacement, assuming Engram is probably not a long-term piece here in Jacksonville. He was quite good last year, but I'm not sure. They will want to extend him because they've got a lot of guys they have to pay within the next few years. The Broncos with their first 2 picks of the day. Broncos country, let's ride! They're going to pick Keanu Benton, defensive lineman out of Wisconsin, and A.T. Perry, wide receiver out of Wake Forest. Benton's a talented player, very solid at the Senior Bowl, gives the Broncos another piece inside. And then A.T. Perry, 6'5", receivers with his size should not move the way that A.T. Perry does. I think his stock has gone up quite a bit. There have been some trade rumblings with really all of Denver's big-time receivers, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Won't be surprised if one of those guys gets traded before the season starts. And if it is Sutton in particular, then A.T. Perry will be a perfect replacement. Jordan Battle, defensive back out of Alabama to the Rams with pick 69. Nice. Battle's been a 4-year starter for Nick Saban in the secondary. He's going to be ready to play right away. Very versatile guy. I think the Rams are going to like him. Michael Wilson, wide receiver out of Stanford, to the Titans. He's just all around really solid, and I think the Titans obviously need wide receiver quite a bit. Their receiving core is probably the worst in football, and Wilson's going to be able to play right away. Zach Charbonnet, running back out of UCLA to the Saints. They need more of an early down runner. Alvin Kamara's legal status is also in question, just like Joe Mixon. And Kamara's also getting older, and he did show signs of regression last year. You're going to need a new long-term running back, and I think Charbonnet would be a nice fit on this offense. Next up at 72, the Tennessee Titans select Luke Whippler, center out of Ohio State. The Titans did not have a second-round pick, thanks to moving up for Anthony Richardson. But here in the third round, they get him a receiver with Michael Wilson and some protection with Luke Whippler, who will be able to slide into center and hopefully replace the longtime stalwart that they've had there with Ben Jones. Moro Ojomo, defensive lineman out of Texas, to the Texans. Houston's going to want to add some more defensive pieces for DeMeco Ryans to work with, and I think Ojomo would be a solid piece. Ivan Pace Jr., linebacker out of Cincinnati to the Cleveland Browns. This is the Browns' first pick of the day. Ivan Pace is a little bit undersized, but he's a talented player who I think the Browns are going to like. Byron Young, edge rusher out of Tennessee to the Falcons. They could use some more pass rush. They have not addressed the front seven yet today, so now they will with Young. DeMarvion Overshown, linebacker out of Texas to the Chargers. This is one of the many picks they got with their trade back earlier today with New England. Overshown had a dreadful 2021, but was a lot better last year, rejuvenating his draft stock to a possible top 100 spot. Rashee Rice, wide receiver out of SMU to the Rams. He's a big-bodied receiver who could be a nice fit. They could use some more talent on the outside. Their projected outside starting receivers are Allen Robinson and Ben Skowronek. Not great. They have Cooper Kupp, who can play on the outside, and, I mean, he's Cooper Kupp. He's freaking awesome. But they could use another guy with him, because Cooper Kupp, ideally, I mean, I guess he can do it alone because he's that good, but it would make things a little bit easier on the offense if Cooper Kupp is not the only good pass catcher. Zach Harrison, edge rusher out of Ohio State to the Packers. This feels like a Packers pick, a raw, toolsy pass rusher coming from a big-time program. I mean, Zach Harrison is Packer written all over him. Jalen Jones, defensive back out of Texas A&M to the Colts. He was recruited to Texas A&M as a safety. He can play corner as well, versatile guy. The Colts could use some more corners. Stephon Gilmore's out the door. Kenny Moore's not getting any younger. So I think Jones will be a solid pick for them here in the middle of the third round. Siaki Ika, the big defensive tackle out of Baylor to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Big-time run defender. You can plug him right in, and he can really improve the Steelers' run defense. At 81, we've got a trade. This pick originally belonged to Detroit, but is now going to Dallas. The Cowboys get picks 81 and 194, while the Lions get 90, 129, and 244. The Cowboys are moving up for Dwayne McBride, running back out of UAB. I think he can be an early down runner, which is something they're going to need. They brought back Tony Pollard on the franchise tag, but I think Tony Pollard is best when he's got a running mate. Ezekiel Elliott is out the door. Insert Dwayne McBride. Trenton Simpson, linebacker out of Clemson to the Buccaneers. Simpson's a little bit raw, but he's a really good athlete. Devin White and Levante David, I don't know if they're in the Bucs' long-term plans. David's getting older. Devin White was pretty bad last year. I'm not sure if they're going to want to bring him back long-term. So Trenton Simpson can be a guy they look to develop and maybe make a starter next year. Jaden Reed, wide receiver out of Michigan State to the Seahawks. I think a lot of people have compared him to Tyler Lockett, so this pick is pretty fitting. Lockett, I think, can play on the outside and inside, so the two of them can still play together, but eventually Tyler Lockett will be getting older, so he can be the long-term replacement, but for right now, you can slide him into the slot, and he can make an early impact. Luke Schoonmaker, tight end out of Michigan to the Dolphins. They let go of Mike Gesicki. I think they're going to look for more of an all-around tight end rather than a pure receiver, which is what Gesicki was. So I think Schoonmaker could be a good fit with the offense. Carl Brooks, edge rusher out of Bowling Green to the Colts. Brooks is a pretty versatile player. I think it could be a good fit on their defense, regardless of where they decide to use him. Antonio Johnson, safety out of Texas A&M to the Buffalo Bills. Johnson's a pretty versatile player. The Bills could use some safety help. Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde are getting older. DeMar Hamlin's status is a question mark, and I mean, it's not like Hamlin was a proven player anyway. So I think Johnson could be a good fit for them. And then Seattle at 87 selects Dorian Thompson-Robinson, quarterback out of UCLA. The Seahawks got this pick earlier today from Minnesota in the Tyreek Stevenson, Maisie Smith swap. Thompson Robinson has some things to like. He has had a very linear progression at UCLA, which I think is a good thing. What I mean by that is that he has consistently improved every year as a starter, and he's got some really good physical tools at the quarterback position. Maybe Seattle looks to develop him and makes him their long-term guy after Geno Smith. I don't know. I really think this pick would make sense. I know Tanner McKee is still on the board, but I think Thompson Robinson would really work for them. Chris Smith, safety out of Georgia, to the Jacksonville Jaguars, gets him another piece back there with Rayshon Jenkins and Andre Sisco. Juice Scruggs, center out of Penn State, to the Giants. They could use some help on the interior of the offensive line. I think he'd be a good pick there. Chandler Zavala, guard out of NC State, to Detroit. They moved up for Devin Witherspoon earlier today. They just moved down. They got this pick from Dallas with the Dwayne McBride swap. And now Zavala can be inserted to eventually play guard. They did sign Graham Glasgow, but he's probably not a long-term thing. Jonah Jackson's also going to be on an expiring deal. I'm not sure if the Lions are going to want to pay him long-term, so guard will be an area they likely try to address early. Jalen Hyatt, finally off the board. I think Hyatt's going to go later than people expect. He is really a slot-only guy. At least he mainly played out of the slot at Tennessee, but he's not really a consistent route runner. His route tree is limited. He was a little underwhelming at the Combine, so I think the stock on him overall is a lot lower than it was a few months ago, but I think he could be a good pick for the Bills if they want to add some more juice to the offense. Isaiah Foskey, edge rusher out of Notre Dame, to the Bengals, gets him another pass rusher. You can never have too many guys going after the quarterback. Dorian Williams, linebacker out of Tulane, to the Panthers. He had a really good season for them. Carolina could use another guy at linebacker in the front seven. Marvin Mims, wide receiver out of Oklahoma, to the Philadelphia Eagles. I think he could be a pretty good pick here. Mims is a talented player, mainly a slot guy. I think the Eagles would like to have a nice guy inside, along with obviously A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith as their main two. Zach Kuntz, tight end out of Old Dominion, to the Chiefs. I understand the Chiefs had the best tight end in football, but Travis Kelce's, I think, going to be 34 pretty soon. He is still on the top of his game, but I think the Chiefs are going to want to develop a long-term replacement. Why not the most athletic tight end really in recent memory with Zach Kuntz? I think his relative athletic score is the best among tight ends within the last 2 or 3 decades. So, I mean, talk about a possible long-term replacement with the upside he has. I really like this pick for Kansas City. Here are the 7 compensatory picks for the third round, the final 7 picks of the day, starting with Andrew Voorhees, guard out of USC, to the Cardinals. Probably won't be able to play early. He tore his ACL, I think, during his combine workout, but he could be a nice long-term addition to the offensive line. Tucker Kraft, tight end out of South Dakota State, to the Washington Commanders. I think he'll be able to make an impact right away, which is certainly what you look for of a late third-round pick. Kobe Turner, defensive lineman out of Wake Forest, to the Cleveland Browns. They could use some more bodies within the defensive line. The Niners have 3 picks here, 99, 101, and 102. They'll start with Tyler Steen, the offensive tackle out of Alabama. He's been the left tackle for the Crimson Tide for a number of years. Trent Williams is not getting any younger. Maybe they look for a long-term replacement here. Tanner McKee out of Stanford, the quarterback, is the 100th pick in the draft to the Raiders. They did sign Jimmy Garoppolo, but maybe they want a young guy to develop behind him, and Tanner McKee is not a bad option here. Darius Rush, cornerback out of South Carolina, to the 49ers. I think this is really good value. He's definitely a top 100 player in this draft class. And then the Niners are back on the clock at 102, but I had them trading the pick away to New England. The Patriots receive 102, 216, and 247, while the Niners get 117 and 135. New England selects Nick Herbig, the edge rusher out of Wisconsin. He just screams New England Patriot, a hybrid edge linebacker type. Josh Uche, who's also a hybrid edge linebacker type, is on the last year of his contract. Uche made himself a lot of money last year. He was quite good. Maybe New England doesn't want to pay him. They know they can draft a player similar to him because they've done it before, like Nick Herbig. So that'll wrap up this mock draft. 3 rounds with trades. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel as well if you are new. Peace out.